Welcome, Commissioners, to the CVRPC Board of Commissioners meeting of February 11th. The first thing we do is we usually go around the room to introduce ourselves. I'm Laura Hill Eubanks from Northfield, and I'm the chair of the commission.
Bonnie Woniger, staff.
George Klang, Barrytown alternate.
Don LaHaye, Waitsfield.
Alan Kleinbush, Duxbury.
Molly East Montpelier, alternate.
Bob Warnick, Berlin.
Robin Chunk, Marshfield.
John Brayback, Palace representative.
Brent Southern, Plainview.
Jenna Shadney, Berry City.
Danielle Owczarski, and watershed planner for the state of Vermont.
Pam, staff.
Sarah Torrey, Wetlands.
Rob Lamert, Berlin.
Lee Catania.
Bill Aaron.
Lister.
Michael Gray, Woodbury.
Peter Kirby, Washington.
Maya Rock, staff. Nancy Chartrand, staff.
Steve Logspeech, Waterbury.
Great. Before we get started, does anyone have any adjustments to the agenda that they'd like? Hearing none, the next item is public comments. We do have some members of the public here. Would you like to say anything before we get started? Okay, thank you. First up is the draft Basin 14 Tactical Basin Plan, and Danielle Owczarski is going to do a presentation on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you have it up there, except the mouse is really fast. So when you scroll through your story map, just be careful. I'll get out of your way. Yeah, go slow on it.
Would you like one of us to drive for you so that you can point at the screen, Danielle?
I can do that if
I don't think so.
Danielle.
The only pointing I think I'll need to use with the mouse. Yeah, I apologize for having my back. Sorry about that. Alright. So thank you for having me here tonight to talk about the draft 14 Tactical Basin Plan. So this is really like the pre-draft. This is the first thing I put together that I share with the internal staff at the state that helps me to write these sections and provides me the information. So you're getting like the sneak peek so that you can have adequate time to review the plan and provide me comments on it. So this is a really great time to look through it and see if there are any things in particular that you maybe want to know more about, that you think might be missing in the plan, any questions you might have. I'm also really interested to know what works in the plan. You know, what do you actually like about the plan? What are things in the plan that you think are really valuable? And if you find there are things in the plan that you really don't think are valuable or are too confusing. So that would be helpful because that will help us to write these plans and make them better each iteration that we put together. So really, in Basin 14, the focus is just in Orange and Washington. So hi, Lee. Orange, hi, Peter. And it's mostly in the headwaters of these areas. So this picture to the right, it kind of just looks like a really messy photo. You're probably wondering sort of what's going on. So some of you might remember July 1st in 2017, we had a pretty bad storm event, and it caused a lot of flooding in some of the towns in Basin 14, and particularly in Thetford. So the picture you're looking at is a wetland in the headwaters of the Waits River, and it's, or no, these are wells, and it's Gillette Swamp, so it's a pretty beautiful, large swamp up in the headwaters. And during this event, there was a mass of water that came down and washed out one of the roads. And the wetland, being there with all its vegetation, captured a lot of the sediment that came out from the road and slowed down the floodwaters within the wetland. So the streams that were connected to that wetland really never saw the large flood pulses because they sucked up all the water. So that's just something I want you to think about in terms of resources that we have that are already there, that we don't have to really pay anything for. They're generally free, other than maybe the tax that the person has to pay on the land. And they provide this service to everybody that's in the watershed. And you may have noticed if you read the summary that mitigating the impacts of climate change is an overarching goal of the 2020 Basin 14 Tactical Basin Plan. Overall, the water quality in Basin 14 is actually pretty stellar. It's a very nice watershed, and I think the biggest issues that are facing it are the impacts that flooding events, intense rain events, increased precipitation are going to have on the river channels, but also in communities in terms of development along those river channels, along those water bodies, and then also all the runoff that's coming off of the land and ending up in the water from these events. So this is interesting. It's not the photo that's supposed to show up here. What you're supposed to see is a video that I can't play because Pam told me we couldn't play videos the last time. So it's a video in Thetford, and it's just basically showing the floodwaters washing out one of the roads. And I was looking at some of the articles from the Valley News, and I saw this quote, and it said, when it started to rain, I came down here in my garage and watched my driveway dissolve. This side of the road is not equipped to take this much water. That side is, but the culvert won't let it through. So I think it's just an example of the things that are facing all the communities when we have these events, and making sure when we're planning to deal with how do we deal with this floodwater, and then how do we make it so that when it gets to the larger streams and the lakes and the larger rivers that it's not causing water quality issues. And you'll learn a little bit more about this monitoring. I'm not really sure. Let me click on this, see if that helps. There we go. So this is actually the video. I shouldn't click on it though, right?
You might not be able to hear it. I tested it before and it didn't work, but you'll still be able to see it.
See how good the internet connection is here. It's a short video. So it shouldn't take too long to load.
Give us the soundtrack.
I know I should have it. Okay, well.
Such is Vermont.
I know, right? I'm like, oh, here, did I do this? It'll do it. You can kind of see it. Anyway, so it's like basically the river has just completely pushed out the culvert and washed out the entire road. But then you can see a little further down, it looks like there's another culvert, but it's an open box culvert, so you've probably seen these. It's like a shape of a box and the bottom is open to the riverbed, and it actually is doing pretty good, pushing all the water and the debris through. So it was just the right size, and it looked relatively new. So, yay!
Oh wow, look at that.
So there's somebody's driveway, I think, right there. Here's the larger culvert. So yeah, you can go and check out that video.
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's fine. So the map you're looking at here, this is in Barnet, and I don't know if you can see my pointer. It is actually really small, but up on kind of the upper right-hand side, this little stream here is called Cloud Brook, and Cloud Brook flows into the Stevens River. And on September 6, 2017, so that same year, a few months later, we monitored a site on Cloud Brook, and it was right here, and it was just above, right here's the elementary school. And and what we noticed when we went to the site is that there were signs that the culvert had been plugged with large wood and also river stones. And the watershed was pretty small, as you saw. So when you look at the Stevens branch, that's quite a large river, a very large watershed, and this is quite small. So it seemed kind of crazy that you would have that much water coming through there. And then when we went upstream a little bit, we found a landslide just upstream from the culvert. So we figured that that's where a lot of, probably some of that wood came from. There might have also been some ponds upstream that might have blown out as well and brought some of that wood down. And this was quite large for such a small brook. And the flooding and debris from the landslide, it had scoured the banks. You can't see it as well here, but you could see all the roots with the trees kind of sticking out, so it really opened up the stream. And we were really surprised that the road wasn't washed out. It's a state highway, and I don't know how they managed to get the debris out before it blew out the road. Because when you went in there, it was much higher than your head, so the water must have backed up really high. It would have been really scary to be in that area. And then there's a house kind of over here. And then we weren't able to complete the fish assessment because of the damage, but we were able to look at the macroinvertebrate community. So that's generally the early stages of bugs like mayflies and dragonflies. You know, they're like little bugs that live under the rocks in the water, and they help us to identify, you know, the health of the stream by looking at the communities. And so this community was in good condition. So you may say, well, good, that sounds good, right? So good basically means it just meets our water quality standards. Generally, most of the sites, if you look in the plan, and you're able to look through the whole plan, at the end of the plan we have the monitoring data from the last 5 years. And most of the streams in this basin scored very good to excellent. And really you only see streams with like a good, fair, and a fair rating, or the ones that really aren't doing very well in the basin. So it did show some impact from what we were seeing in the stream. And it makes sense because the stream was like totally scoured, completely like pulled and reset. So it's amazing that there was bugs there in the first place. The conductivity levels were elevated, and so sometimes we'll see that in streams where there is chloride, so like road salts, or we'll see that in places where there might be a lot of nutrients, but we think it's probably just because there's a lot of clay that was reintroduced into the system from the flooding. And then we plan to go back there in 2022 to see how the site's recovered, because the macroinvertebrates generally recover pretty well within a few years, and then we'll see what's going on with the fish there as well. So that just gives you an idea of some of the impacts these flooding events can have. And then this isn't actually in Basin 14. I think it's out of the White River during Irene. But the state has a climate change web page, and it reports all the changes that are happening in the local climate. So it has things that are specific to Vermont in there. So Pam can send the link to you for this map, and you can click any of these, and it gives you the data that backs this information up. So we're really looking at rising high and low temperatures in Vermont, rising average temperatures, shorter winters, less snow cover. And we'll see if that changes to see if maybe we'll get more snow cover in the future. But we're seeing more intense storms, and then we're seeing more total precipitation. And one of the things that worries me too about the flooding events is when you have things that are either like contaminated soils in some of these sites that get eroded and pulled into the rivers, or I just think about as a kid the stuff that we had like in our basement, you know, in our house, like any of the debris that gets washed out into the rivers from those events as well. So I think it's really important. We have such a strong focus on phosphorus because of Lake Champlain, but there's a lot of other pollutants that end up in the water from events like this as well.
Such as?
So you can figure out anything that might be in somebody's garage, so car oil, any types of cleaners, and then I would say fuel oil as well. So yeah, fuel tanks that people might have outside. So that's, I mean, even doing things like that, locating those things not in areas that may end up flooding can help. And that's just something small.
Put them on your roof.
What's that?
Put your heating oil tank on your roof.
Get off on
Yeah. So I just want you to keep this in mind as you read through the plan and think about the actions identified. I think that anytime we're thinking about water quality, it's great if we can think about, well, can this also help with protecting us from changes that we're seeing in our climate in terms of rain events. So let's talk a little bit about the plan. So Pam, I think, sent everybody a copy of the plan. I'm thinking in probably, the executive summary. So the executive summary is basically a summary of what's in the plan and gives you a little bit of an idea of what you're going to get in the plan. So the plan format, we're trying to make sure that all our basin plans are written similarly, so that when you look at a basin plan, it looks similar to the last basin plan that you read. And so I'm just getting you ready for the Winooski, I think, is coming up next. And so chapter 1 is just our basin overview. So I talk a little bit about the land use, the geology, and some of the conditions of Basin 14. Gives you an idea of actually the scope of it, like what does it cover, what are the towns geographically, what does it cover, what are the major lakes and rivers. And then chapter 2 is our protection priorities. Chapter 3 has the restoration priorities. Chapter 4 is broken up by sector because that's how we are looking at the way that we're sort of organizing our actions by sector, because some people are just mainly interested in roads, or they're mainly interested in agriculture, or mainly interested in natural resources. I think from the town's perspective, they're probably more interested in the town and what they need to do in their towns. So you'll see in chapter 5 where the implementation table is that I've organized that the best I can by town. So that's one way that you can see what's going on in the towns. So this is just a visual from the executive summary, gives you an idea of what the protection priorities are and what the restoration priorities are. Gives you a little bit of information about the different stressors in the basin. And then when you get to chapter 1, it's going to talk about land use and geology, and then also the demographics of the basin. And then chapters 2 and 3 focus on protection and restoration priorities. So you'll see with these two maps, this is what I'm talking about when it comes down to the good water quality in Basin 14, is this is all these rivers that you see highlighted are all waters that we've identified as high quality waters. And then if you look at...
Can you scroll up a little bit just to see, can you just kind of focus it, just circle around where in Washington
Oh, okay.
maybe
Yeah, good
some high
point.
quality
So
water
here you
so
go.
can see that.
So here's Washington, then orange is over here, because Berrytown, and then orange, kind of right, I think there.
I think that's going to be really where the focus is
Yeah.
there in the headwater.
Yeah, so it's really kind of this, I think this is the border of orange. Like that, and then Washington, you have a little piece right there. So it's mostly in the headwaters of the Waits River. And there is some state forest that's included in that area, and then I think Washington also has, I think you have your own state forest, or your own town forest
No.
as well?
It's
No?
on maps, but we do not.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No.
Did you?
No.
No?
It just somehow or other it ended up on the map.
Interesting, okay. So we'll have to figure out what that's about.
Yeah, curious.
And then you'll see then our restoration priorities, there's really not as many. You know, it's more focused in the lower parts of the watershed, which means, you know, anything that goes on in the upper parts of the watershed does influence the lower parts of the watershed. So anything that you're doing is really important to help these water bodies further down. So this is the Waits River, this is the Ampom, the Noosic River, and the Stevens is up here. That's Harvey's Lake, that little black thing. And then this is the list of those waters, and then what their pollutants and problems are. And so you can read all this in the plan. And it goes into more detail about the specific sites. So chapter 4, like I was saying, we focus on the solutions by sector, looking at agriculture. And a lot of this was set up based on the Lake Champlain phosphorus, TMDL, and I'm assuming everybody's familiar with that. I don't have to. Does anybody? It's okay.
Might
So
want to repeat what a TMDL is, everybody.
So I think the problem with the TMDL is it's the way the actual acronym is kind of confusing. Because it's called, the TMDL stands for the total maximum daily load, and that just means the amount that a water body can take of a pollutant before it starts to cause issues with water quality. So you'll start to see problems with the aquatic biota, you might see algal blooms, things that are causing issues with water quality. But the TMDL in itself is actually a plan that you put together to deal with the issues, to meet those allocations of pollution reduction.
Danielle?
Yeah.
I had a question about that. This is part of the Connecticut River
Yes.
watershed, correct? So my understanding is that nitrogen is the indicator in the Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
So is that reflected in this plan that that that's the indicator or not?
So we talk about, there's the Long Island Sound TMDL. The majority of the nitrogen pollution in Vermont is mostly atmospheric deposition.
Okay.
So it's coming from sources that are being kind of pulled over on the wind and then dropped into through precipitation. So that's the majority of like our load of that. And then when you look at it overall in the entire Connecticut River watershed, places like Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York, those are really the ones that are contributing the large amounts of nitrogen that are causing the dead zones in the Long Island Sound. So we will still be, when they finally come up with how much we're contributing, and then come up with recommendations of how much we need to reduce that, I think a lot of it will probably come through wastewater system upgrades, because I don't think we're going to have a really high amount of loading from our basins. I think up north a little bit in the Connecticut River Basin, it's a little bit higher for agriculture. And that's about it. So we might have some funding that will come to us to help with some of those reductions, but I think that will probably help us to do things that we might already need to do, and then we'll also be able to get reductions of nitrogen from that. But most of it really is coming from wastewater treatment facility discharge, and that's regulated here, so it would just be upgrades, you know, to those systems. But I mean, they're so de minimis compared to what Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York are contributing. So we focus in the plan on agriculture, developed lands, stormwater. So that's water that's running off of surfaces that can't infiltrate water. So that water just runs off and ends up directly in a water body. So anything that might be on a surface gets dissolved in water, because water is like the universal solvent. It just bonds well with everything, it picks up everything, and then it brings it into the rivers. So that's generally what we're looking at for stormwater. We're looking at how can we keep runoff that's coming down our paved roads or our paved parking lots and make it so it's not going in the rivers, that there's some treatment for it before it ends up in rivers. The other thing that stormwater does when we build these treatments for it is that it will treat a certain volume of water. So the thing with flooding events is that generally what those practices are built for are going to be much smaller than what we would get with a large flooding event. So most likely that water isn't going to be treated from these practices. So that's something to remember as well. And then developed lands, we focus on roads, and I'm assuming most people are familiar with the municipal road general permit, so that's a part of looking at this plan and figuring out how towns are doing and tracking that. Wastewater improvements, we have a small section in the plan that focuses on that. And then natural resource restoration, and that's focused on rivers, wetlands, and lakes, and forests as well. And then chapter 5 to me is kind of, I don't know, I think is one of the most informative and useful parts of the plan. So that's our implementation table, and it's broken up by sector, and it lists the number of actions in the plan for the next 5 years to try to focus on to meet our water quality goals. And then this, the Basin 14 report card, which I think is really great. So I and then the watershed partners and a lot of the state staff helped me to develop this. So this was taking all the actions from the 2015 plan and figuring out, well, what did we do? How many of these did we complete? How many are in progress? How many are ongoing? What do we still need to do? So this basically has a description of the action in the first column, and then an update, and then recommendations to the 2020 plan. So some of these things are pushed forward to the 2020 plan. And so before I get to the targets for Orange and Washington, I just took the things out of the plan that were specific to Orange and Washington. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So for Orange and Washington, we have a few protection targets. So the Upper Waits River and the Riddle Pond outlet meet standards for high quality fishing. The Upper Waits River, the East Orange branch of the Waits River, Upper Cookville Brook, and Meadow Brook provide high-quality waters for aquatic biota, but these sites, they require some extra sampling, so we're gonna do some sampling in 2022 to see if they meet the criteria for the water quality standards for reclassification, which is that high-quality water. And you generally have to have 2 sampling events within a certain amount of time, so we've just done 1, or one of the other sampling events we have is too old, so we just need to resample.
So Danielle,
Yep.
when you say protection, are you talking about reclassifying the water so that now it's getting protection as a higher valued water?
So protection can happen in a lot of different ways, and this is where I feel like we really put a lot into the hands of like the towns or the watershed groups in the areas to say, how do you want to protect these waters? The state has done their own reclassification for some waters. They did a bunch in the White River watershed a few years ago when they updated the water quality standards. So in some cases that might be when they would do it. But we're trying to build up a process where the towns can petition or watershed groups can petition for reclassification. And the reclassification, what it does is it basically cements that this water meets these standards, and if we find that these waters, something happens and they're not meeting the standards, we have to determine what's going on and we need to remediate it. So it's like, it's at a higher protection. So right now, they would have to go all the way down to what we call like below a B2 water. So when you saw that rating for like good to excellent, it would have to get to that like fair or poor. But those high quality waters, if they're reclassified, if they go down from excellent to good, then boom, we have to do something about that. So they can't get all the way down to fair before we do something about it. But they can also be protected in the way that maybe the town wants to increase setbacks on those waters. Maybe the town wants to conserve the land, or work with a local land trust to conserve land around those waters. So there's different ways that it could be done and protected. So I think it's really, instead of really pushing this stuff on towns, I think it makes sense to figure out for the town what works best for them for that protection. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that the state might also be interested in pushing it forward and helping it move forward. We just don't have any plans right now to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Do you review the town plans?
I do my best. So what's really helpful for me is Pam helps me and to understand what the towns have for protections for like local ordinances. But that's generally it.
Well, what I mean is, if you look at the town plan overall, if somebody is proposing higher density development, that's going to have an impact on what you're trying to do. And so I was just wondering if you look at the town plans for consistency with what the basin plans are doing.
So that is kind of the work that this is what we're doing right now basically. So it's one of the reasons why we have the regional planning commissions as statutory partners, so they can help us with that. Because the planners, we generally don't have the capacity to be able to look at all the town plans. But in working with the regional planning commissions, we have your review, we have the commission's review, and they're supposed to help and say, this conforms with the town plans or it's not conforming.
So that will go on to us, the RPC staff, to look at the town plans for both Orange and Washington, make sure nothing conflicts here with her basin plan. And we also look at the regional plan as well. Like we did that with the Winooski and the lake, and we went through that process.
So it's not perfect. I mean, it'd be great if I was able to like really dig into all the plans and look at them and see where those, and to see where the towns are in agreement, you know, where they also maybe have recognized that some of these waters are high quality in the town plans as well.
Did the basin plan affect DEC's issuing of permits to spray whey and manure?
No.
Okay, just so to be clear, that presents a problem because it seems to me that all the remediation efforts are focused on the towns doing this and the towns doing that. And one of the things that I find frustrating, I am in Plainfield, we have a poor rating for our river is we're paying penalty for actions that aren't really ours. And it's really unfortunate that your agency is working at cross purposes by increasing permits to spray. I witnessed a spraying event on the snow next to the Winooski in East Montpelier. And you know, East Montpelier is probably going to end up getting a bill or down the line because you're talking about report cards and grading. And what's going to happen is, because of another person's action, the taxpayer in East Montpelier and Marshfield and Plainfield are going to end up subsidizing stuff that doesn't have anything to do with them. So
what's the spraying that you're speaking
well,
about?
the Cabot Creamery sprays way
Okay.
on the right next to the fields. That goes in. That would obviously increase the, you know, all the things you're worried about. It seems to me that if you're not taking a comprehensive approach and assessing different bodies in terms of what the problems are, it's going to end up being a bill for the towns.
So I don't know any specifics about the area that you're talking about.
I'll be happy to. I'll contact you later and explain.
Yeah, so and Karen Bates would be the other person to talk to about that because she's the planner in that area. So the only example I would have is in the Deerbrook watershed up in Georgia, where there used to be a whey industrial site there. So they did, like, I think they made baby formula and things like that. And so they were spraying up in the upper parts of the watershed. And at that point, we were getting reports that there was discharge into the rivers from this, and it was also impacting the aquatic biota in the stream there. And what we did is we ended up sampling, we ended up showing that the whey was having this impact to the water quality, and then they were required to stop doing the spreading and spraying in that part of the watershed. So I still feel like it's still having an impact after all these years, because a lot of it ended up in some of the larger wetlands. So I think that over time it's still discharging every once in a while. But that would be an example where if we're able to identify a water quality issue and then identify the source of that issue, then we can target that source. And I'm assuming it would be the Agency of Agriculture that's permitting that spraying as well.
Yeah.
But that would be something that, if it was an issue, we were finding it was a water quality issue, so say it was happening in the Basin 14, and we were finding that it was impacting water quality, and we knew that there was spraying in that area, then we would work with the Agency of Ag to try to address what those issues are. I'm sure if any of you have listened to the news, you know that there are issues in terms of the Agency of Ag and A&R enforcement, and I feel like people are kind of going through growing pains. And it's really frustrating to hear, because if you know something is causing pollution, why can't we just say stop doing it? So I agree with you about that, and in the plans we do the best to say this is what we should be doing. We are trying to move in the right direction and work with the Agency of Agriculture. So I feel like we're trying to work together better.
Well, I understand, but I also think that towns should prepare for increased costs for things that are not really their fault, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I would say that in general, I feel like in this plan, the things that I targeted for the towns are things that are specific to the towns. And the things that are targeted for the agricultural community are specific to the agricultural community. They're something that the towns have to do. So that's at least how we try to break it up in the plans. Because we try to make sure that everybody who's contributing is also working on the solutions. But because I'm here to talk to you all tonight, I'm focused on the towns, because that's what Pam asked me to do.
Danielle,
yeah.
When it comes to things like potential water quality concerns, how would a town or the board engage with the basin plan? Would they request monitoring? Does that happen in a separate process? So as an action, the board could request, or a town could request, that monitoring occur in certain spots?
Yes. So there's one wetland along Cookville Brook called Cookville Swamp. I think we just named it that. It's a bunch of beaver wetlands along slow winding stream. And so this one has been recommended by our wetlands program for further study to see if it meets the Class 1 criteria for protection. And then the actions for the plans that are specific to Orange and Washington. And as I said, this is really kind of specific to the ag community. So these are priorities that I worked with our agricultural partners to develop. So to develop best management practices for farmers to submit to the Vermont Agency of Food and Markets for funding. So this really comes specifically for farmers who are applying for funding to the agency, but aren't necessarily getting that funding because they're not specific enough about which practices they want to implement on their farms. They think they want to do something, but they're not sure. So we want to make sure that our ag partners are working with the farms to help them to develop those practices and submit good projects to the agency. We want to develop and support an equipment rental library management system. So in Basin 14, we have a no-till drill rental. So that's to help farmers to do no-till and do cover cropping. And we have that set up, and we just want to make sure that that continues to be supported because it's something that's important in the agricultural community to get the cover crops out at the right time of year. We also have, if you're not aware of it, a Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance. So this covers the Connecticut River watershed, and they have meetings monthly out of White River Junction. And it's a group of farmers who've been working on trying to develop messaging for the groups that they work with and focus on how they can become better at doing water quality work and making sure that they have the funding to do that. We also want to form farm management teams to provide an organized contact for farmers around technical assistance for water quality protection. So we have a lot of different people that we have the Agency of Agriculture, we have the USDA that has the Farm Service Agency, and the Natural Resources Soil Conservation Service. So you have just a lot of different people that are working with farmers. So we're trying to develop a system so we have one contact for the farmers, and then they work with the different groups through that one person. So we're able to get more done. We had suggestions, and so this is feedback that we got from some of the farmers groups, is to continue funding for cover crop and no-till, because that's something that they still need help with at this point. And then also looking into the possibility of creating an interseeding machine for cover cropping. And so that's so they can maintain their cover crops and then also seed while the cover crops are still up, so they can start growing their crops while the cover crops are still there. So all those priorities, those are basin-wide, and those priorities were developed working with farmers in the watershed and then the agricultural community. For developed lands, we want to work with watershed partners and municipalities to prioritize stormwater projects in Basin 14 where reports have been completed. So I think in Washington, really any of the stormwater stuff is not in Basin 14. It's in the Winooski River watershed. And then we also want to implement best management practices for high priority road segments identified, and I'm sorry for the acronyms here because I just pulled them out of the plan, but the road erosion inventories to meet the municipal road general permit requirements. So it's just saying, let's make sure we're getting people the funding and help they need to get those high priority road segments fixed. Then natural resources for wetlands, we are making a recommendation for towns to update their wetland mapping. So that's something that if towns are interested in doing, like let's talk about where we can get funding to do that type of work. The way it works is that the state has a statewide wetland mapping layer. So towns, if people are coming in for development projects, towns can look at those maps and say, it looks like you have a wetland, you should contact your natural resource folks. But if you can get these wetlands, the mapping updated, so you can have somebody focus in on your town and see where they might not be mapped, where they may have been missed, and then update that so you can protect your wetlands better. That's something that we're recommending.
So is that something that the DEC would fund later as opposed to having a new statewide layer done through DCGI. This would be more on a town-by-town basis.
Yeah. So you could even do
Would
multiple
DEC actually
towns.
fund those kind of projects for
We
you town?
don't have funding for them, but I'm thinking, what I think is that if we had a town that wanted to do it, we could figure it out. We could figure out funding for it. And I think you could probably do it through municipal planning grants. I don't know if that's where people want to focus that funding.
Yeah, they're usually done through a natural resources inventory, which a municipal planning grant will fund, depending on how competitive it is that year and whether.
Okay.
Because
It's not super expensive, so there may be other ways that we could fund it. And then what happens is you have your updated map, and then you can send that to the department, and they can update it in their state database. I think that eventually they would love to have the whole state remapped. It's just not something that's going to be happening anytime soon. And then also for wetlands, to provide outreach and training to interested communities. I'm conducting Vermont rapid assessment method inventories. So this is something that anybody can do. We have Charlie Hone, who is one of our wetlands staff, who would come out, like if you have a conservation commission that's interested in learning about wetlands and doing these rapid assessments. You basically, it's like a sheet of paper front and back, and Charlie tells you how to fill it, how to fill it out, and you can go around and do these assessments on wetlands. So if it's something that you're interested in, that's something you can support. So our focus, and this first one is really, I think, we have it in the rivers section because I have to put it somewhere, but I think it's protection for rivers and lakes and, and wetlands. But this is to make sure that all the towns in Basin 14 are increasing their emergency relief assistance fund rating. And they can do that by increasing municipal protections and water resources through local ordinances and the adoptions of the recommended standards and plans. So the 4 things are river corridor protection, or 5, river corridor protection, National Floodplain Insurance Program, if your town's a part of that. To have a local emergency management plan, and then a local hazard mitigation plan. So we just want folks to continue to keep these up to date, and then implement the recommendations in any of these plans as well. If I am working with Ned Swanberg, who works for the Rivers Program, and Ned knows all about this stuff, so he's actually going to help update the plan with a little bit more information to make it more helpful to folks when we're looking through this section. And then for rivers, also to assess candidates for reclassification on municipal, and a lot of those waters too, that are those high quality waters, are on our lands, are on our public lands. So on the lands that the Forest Parks and Recreation manage, but that we all own. So we're going to be working with them, and then any municipalities that are interested in reclassification, and then making sure we continue on with the monitoring for those sites.
You're talking about floodplain protection and stuff. Just the maps I know in orange for the floodplains are probably 10 years younger than I am. That's how old they are. And they really need to be updated. And there's really no priority for that. And I don't know how you go about getting priority to have those maps updated.
Okay.
Because they're virtually useless.
Do you know anything, Pam, about
FEMA is the one who updates those maps, and there have been, FEMA has been coming to Vermont to do some updates recently. I know in the Pasumsic, and then another watershed, Charlie may be able to help me here, but over by Lake Champlain. I don't remember which watershed it is, Charlie, but unfortunately this area, orange, isn't quite on the list yet, but.
Is it only FEMA who can do those, like through the towns?
We have our own layer, Lee, for that Dan Courier and Ashley Andrews created a while ago for region-wide for the special flood hazard area. That, if it's not digitally available. So we have that digital data.
But they're not regulatory, where the other maps are. That's the problem. If you're looking at the towns to do protection of the floodplains, get us the regulatory maps.
Can towns increase protection using the flood hazard area map?
So the flood hazard area maps, what we did was we digitized the actual, so we have that data, but it's old data, you're right, and it's not necessarily based on survey proof data or flood insurance study or anything like that. It's not as deep. I don't know Orange's specifics, but you're absolutely right. And in places like Facein, where we had in the Mad River Valley, we had an engineer with a CDB grant that came out from, that was money that came out after Tropical Storm Irene. We had Dubois and King actually model the entire Mad River Valley with more updated LiDAR data, and really showed and then did some survey checkpoints, and has really detailed the 500-year flood and the 100-year flood for the whole valley. And the data is amazing how it contrasts, or Darren may have seen it, how it contrasts in certain places, especially in Facein, with the FEMA data. And there really needs to be the data is even there on a elevation level to do this digitally. It's just, it's because this is a regulatory program, the NFIP. It's got to come from FEMA, but and even those we have those maps for the Mad River Valley, but the towns can't quite use it yet for the regulatory program unless they get what's called a letter of map revision. So it's FEMA that it has to come through.
So you want me to put a plug in there for FEMA?
Yeah.
I don't see why not. I don't know if it'll do anything.
About Riddle Pond and stuff, and we looked at that area from the FEMA maps, and it's no good.
Those streams were never, no flood studies were ever done on those streams. There were no backwater analyses done on any of those streams in Orange.
Right.
Those are all just highlighted maps. There's no actual digital data that goes with any of those maps.
Right.
So it's best guess. My sense is you'd be better off adopting some kind of a quarter approach and use that to regulate the uses adjacent to those streams and Riddle Pond and so forth. The streams themselves are too small to warrant doing a standard step analysis. You know what that is.
Okay, well that's good to know. That's something at least I can chat with Ned about to understand it a little better, and maybe if there's something that we can at least highlight and call it out in the plan as an issue. I just don't know how effective it'll be, but I think it's worth putting there.
So Danielle, we have a few more minutes, I think, before we come back.
We had some success getting LiDAR data through University of Vermont Spatial Labs. And they had funding for us to do it in our area, just FYI. Maybe, I don't know, if you could ask them.
The problem is you're telling, you could tell somebody they can't build there, and you better have a legal basis for doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you know who at UVM by any chance?
Jarlath is the guy who has...
Jarlath O'Neill.
Jarlath?
Jarlath. 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 Yeah, he's British.
And it's the spatial labs, Vermont Spatial Labs, and they sometimes have funding, sometimes could just pitch it.
Excellent, thank you.
And then the last two for natural resources are for forest, and this is also basin-wide. So this is really for our forestry folks, and then also the conservation districts to work together to provide outreach, technical assistance, and workshops to private forest landowners, foresters, and loggers on acceptable management practices, use of skidder bridges, and voluntary harvest guidelines. So it's really just working with the forestry community to make sure that they're implementing acceptable management practices for water quality on their lands, the lands they work on. And then the last one is to implement forest infrastructure restoration projects on state lands. So this is specific to state lands, but this is something that people in private lands can do as well. But we've been working with the Forest Parks and Recreation to focus on culvert replacements and retrofits on their properties, so looking at old logging impacts, fixing things, decommissioning roads, where it makes sense, and identifying these priorities through assessments and also their long-range management plans. And then the planned timeline, so we already had our public kickoff meeting in November, and we're having our first draft internal review right now. And then in March, I hope by the end of March to have the final draft complete, so that'll be getting your feedback and feedback from our internal partners. And then I'll have public meetings on the final draft, so I'll probably come back out to see you all, and we can, just talk about the plan. And then in June, I hope to have the plan complete by the end of June. And that's it. And if you have any questions, you can, talk to Pam, or you can email or call me. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Danielle.
That buildup of woody debris that you showed in the first slide, is that common?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is that when you have these like huge, really quick rain events, you'll also have like on some streams you'll have a bunch of beaver ponds or something, and they'll all blow out at once, and so then you'll get like a bunch of debris. The thing is that if your structures are sized correctly, that stuff will move through. But if you have small structures, small culverts that are undersized, it won't, it gets stuck.
Okay.
So
Can
that's
that,
usually
can that
the
be
issue.
safely removed without disturbing other ecosystems?
Usually, yeah. So like in those flooding events, Pat Ross is one of the stream alterations scientists or engineers for the state. And so Pat, you'll see in the plan, if you read the section on the stream alterations permits, is he has these all like next flood events. And so people will contact him, towns, and they'll want to remove the debris, and he'll work with them to make sure it's done in a way that doesn't cause more, damage.
There's a rule, if it's less than 10 yards, I don't know that you need an actual permit, but you should talk to Pat, but it's...
Yeah, the next flood is like a non-permit, and
Right,
we'll just go,
and,
yep.
and then you cut it into 4-foot pieces is usually the safe way.
Can you get a chipper in or anything?
Not a chipper usually, they just want a chainsaw and 4-foot pieces, but talk to Pat, he's the guy.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have our brothers and sisters from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, and they're going to talk to us about the Interstate 89 2050 study, and I know that Carly Baker is here, and
Eleni Churchill.
And also our board chair, Mike O'Brien.
Okay.
So from the city of Winooski. So I don't know, yes, what's the best way? Do you want one of us to?
If you could.
Sure. Yeah, and then we're going to swap.
Okay.
You want me to sit down? Stand up?
Your choice.
I'm going to sit down.
Depends on how much.
It's a late night. Well, thank you very much for, thank you to the chair for giving us time on the agenda, and Bonnie. It's really nice to be here with you. You may have heard the nice thing about Chittenden County. It's so close to Vermont. It's nice to be in Vermont with you all. Sorry. Thank you, Pam.
That wasn't me, that was Danielle.
Danielle, thank you. So we're in the first round of public meetings around this I-89 2050 study. I'll give you some background about why are we doing this, and then Eleni, who manages our transportation planning work, will get into more technical details around this. First I'll start with, sure, she's going to keep moving me through this, I can tell. No, that's okay. Now, so first I'll tell you just who's doing this, and then we'll get more into the why. So we have a consultant team headed by VHB with an advisory committee, a technical committee, and they have some sub-consultants working for them. The technical committee is mostly our staff and VTrans staff, probably some names you may be familiar with, VTrans, Kevin Marcia, Joe Segali, and Chris Jolly from Federal Highway, and then we have a couple municipal public works staff on the technical, and then we have a large advisory committee, which I hope there's more than me on that. Oh, good.
There's a lot.
Yeah, so we try to kind of invite every organization that we thought might have a clear interest. Well, everybody has, or lots of people have an interest in what happens on 89, but we have our municipalities, We did kind of label and invite, I think Bonnie, connected with Bonnie at a staff level. But I think as we were kind of walking through this, realized, you know, this is maybe big enough that we should connect at a board level also. So that's why Mike wanted to be here and, you know, send a request to get on your agenda to Laura, so thank you. But also the state agencies, and then just different organizations, including the Conservation Law Foundation, VNRC, who I don't see there, but they must be there somewhere, but they're over here. Our Regional Development Corporation, Local Motion, and Green Mountain Transit. So hopefully a bunch of organizations that you're familiar with, and some private sector reps too. So now to the why. So this, why we even decided to look at this really came out of our transportation planning work. And so we did our transportation plan in 2018. That's over here, and we're looking at some other transportation planning documents that exist also. I'll give you a little bit of background on our plan. We spent, this is probably the hardest part, is figuring out like what are the forecasts. So when we did our last plan in 2013, we had population forecasts of, I think, 200,000 people in Chittenden County by, I think, the 2035 or 2040 timeframe. We weren't seeing, you know, the recession that happened, you know, remember that? And we were getting feedback that maybe our population projections in particular were a little too aggressive. And so when we were doing this and updating this for 2018, and looking out even further, because we were also, as you did, we had to do a regional energy plan. So we did our transportation plan and energy plan at the same time, and there's a lot of overlap between those. But we were looking out to 2050. We backed our population back from about 200,000 to 183,000, which I know still sounds like a big number, but it's, you know, significantly less high rate of growth. So we, you know, we're at like 1%, now we're like less than 0.5% of population growth. However, and we used economic policy research, Jeff Carr's firm, who did forecasting for the state, and V-Trans used him. Still forecasting quite a bit of growth in employment for Chittenden County, so 35%. I'm not sure how to feel about that number right now. We are seeing some employment growth, but not that fast. So we'll see if that comes true. And this is our land use, a generalized version of our future land use map. We have 15% of our land area that has been defined by our municipalities for growth. Most of it's public sewer and water. A lot of the villages don't have public and sewer and water, but, you know, do have some higher density zones in those municipalities. And so in the transportation plan, you know, we're setting performance measures, trying to be fiscally constrained, and so we'll skip over that. And our broader, what we call our ECOS plan, it's our regional plan. We have, you know, kind of broad transportation goal. We also have, you know, a pretty basic land use goal to direct growth or encourage growth in those areas planned for growth. And then we looked at a lot of different scenarios. I think this says several, but I think we looked at 10 or 11 scenarios of different land use and transportation issues. And trying to really look at what was happening on our, we have a traffic model, so, but that model's traffic, right? But so we're looking at, you know, how do we deal with congestion, safety issues, but also livability. And we'll kind of keep coming back to that theme. When we look at our actual transportation plan, and we sat down with V-Trans and trying to make sure we understood the transportation budget somewhat, and they're getting close to about 70% of all the transportation funding is just going into preservation investments. So, you know, repaving, bridge replacements, all bridge rehab. So we've kind of started with that, you know, how much money is left after we do that. We also, we're trying to get to a more concentrated growth pattern, and to take advantage of our transit system and the sewer and water systems we have. Our plan had a goal of 80% of new development happening in those locations. This recent plan is trying to get to 90%. So that's a pretty big deal. We've been averaging about 86% since 2010. So we felt like 80 was too low. Let's push. We were getting above 80. Let's push to 90. Safety improvements. That's a high crash locations, HCL. ITS, intelligent transportation system investments. So that's really trying to be more efficient using technology. Transportation demand management programs. So can we avoid people driving by using the bus, carpooling, walking, biking, and of course the walking, biking infrastructure. And then we kind of get to, and then capacity expansion if all that doesn't work, right? So there's kind of a philosophy in our transportation plan that says do everything we can to avoid having to expand the highway system, but realize we may get there. And so, there's a number of projects. If VTrans was in the room, they'd call them, some of them legacy projects, like the Champlain Parkway or Southern Connector or whatever you might know that project, 189 going into Burlington. Some of them are newer though. Exit 12 is something that came out of the CERC alternatives. And please flag me if I'm using a phrase that you're not familiar with. We probably have our own language that we've used.
FERC.
What's that?
FERC?
CERC.
CERC.
So,
Circumferential highway.
yeah, the circumferential highway, yeah, I don't know. I want to say before my time, I'm old enough, but I just wasn't here.
So that was a highway plan to go from
Yeah.
Colchester through, can you explain
Essex,
what
through
the
Yeah,
highway is?
so here's Williston, Essex Junction. This is kind of our urban, zoom in on our urban area. You may be familiar, 289 got built, part of the circumferential highway got built in Essex. It kind of ends on the north side of the Winooski River. So this segment through Williston was, in a lot of permitting process until Governor Shumlin pulled the plug on it in 2011. But as Bonnie noted, it was to go from 89 here in Williston through Essex, through Colchester, and connect back to 89. So it was to kind of give a bypass, if you will, to the congestion that is in, kind of the center, from a traffic standpoint anyway, of our region at exit 14. But it really could not get through the environmental permitting. So the Governor Shumlin rightly pulled the plug on it. It led us down a path of looking at a lot of alternatives if we're not going to do that. So we developed a lot of projects, and some of them you see spotted on here, in those suburban towns to deal with the traffic congestion. Williston in particular was really depending on that segment to get built between 89 and 289. So two-way, Taft's Corner, that whole thing is pretty messy. And they didn't really have a lot of game plan if 289 wasn't completed or the CERC wasn't completed. So anyway, sorry, more history than you wanted maybe, but the thing that the circumferential highway was trying to deal with was congestion over here. So we tried to do our best to deal with congestion in the suburbs. We still hadn't dealt with the congestion that happens here, so I think you can probably go to the next map. And so when we were kind of looking at our whole system, this section, and if you've, so how many of you or people in your family drive into Chittenden County when you have to? Some, okay, welcome neighbors. How many of you drive past exit 14 in the morning? No, not too much now. So, but there's a real heavy movement coming, from Milton, St. Albans, right? We made it pretty easy. They can hop on an interstate and they're down here. This segment right now, if you ask people, they feel like it's already over capacity. We don't really, from a more technical standpoint, it's only in the 80th percentile of capacity, which I think when I say that to the secretary, he gets upset with me. But there's issues in the peak hours. It's not as bad as it could or will be. And so that kind of started to trigger, and we started looking, okay, what happens in 2050 if we do nothing? And then we're over capacity, which really means, at least in the peak hours, you're pretty much stopped dead, which can happen sometimes now, particularly if there's an incident, a rear ender or something. So then we looked at 2050. This is called the transportation plan. So this is, if we do all those things, doubling transit density, or sorry, frequency, trying to do all the mode shift we could do, ITS improvements, other safety improvements, and all the circle turn improvements, we still, and we kind of penciled in an idea, what if we widen this segment right here? It's widened over the Winooski River right now, so it's this segment right here between the bridge and the ramps. What if we widened that? And what if we did another interchange somewhere in South Burlington to take traffic load off exit 14? Well, that helped. That helped this segment, but it moved the congestion just between 15 and 16. So at our TAC, and you guys have a TAC, right? But there are transportation folks that focus more on this. And I said, I'm not sure this is a great idea if we're just moving the congestion around. But what ended up in our plan was we should look at this and try to figure out what really to do, because our regional plan wasn't getting detailed enough to really figure out what to do, nor was it having enough of the public dialogue that would need to be happen if we were going to spend, and to be honest, tens of millions of dollars on an interstate capacity project is a big deal, not just for us, not just for Burlington or South Burlington, but for the state of Vermont. And it's a big policy choice. So I don't know, do I have anything else, or do I punt it over to you now?
Yeah.
So that's background. Any questions on background or how we got here? And I should also preface maybe this conversation with saying we're seeking input at all levels, whether it's formally, from your board or formally from your municipal select board, or if it's just you as an individual or anybody who uses it and wants to give us some input. That's kind of the early stage. We're in the early stage, and Eleni will give you more detail about where we are in the stage of the project and more technical details. Any questions for me before I'll try to shut up?
Hi all, so I'm just going to give you a quick project overview. So we started the project, you can see task 1 over there, the project initiation back in the spring of 2019. We worked many months to basically analyze existing conditions as well as future base conditions. We have a regional model. Charlie went through some of those maps. That's from our regional model that we have in Chittenden County. We're also developing what we call microsimulation models for the entire interstate as well as the interchanges in our county. And we have done that under task 2. That was a big lift because you develop the models, you have to calibrate the models to make sure that they correspond to existing conditions. And now we are in task 3, which is basically we are developing the draft corridor vision and goals for the I-89 corridor as well as our interchanges. And we still have a few tasks here. We have like a couple of more years to go. And then after we develop our corridor vision and goals, then we're just going to look and we evaluate expanding existing interchanges as well as adding new interchanges in the corridor. And then once we finish that evaluation and decide what we need to do with our interchanges, then we're going to just develop alternatives and strategies and bundle those strategies together and run them through the models and look at the environmental impacts and other impacts, land use impacts. And then finally, with the help of our advisory committee as well as our public meetings, we have an extensive public outreach that we're doing. Hopefully we'll get to an implementation plan and a final plan. So we are looking at the entire I-89 corridor in Chittenden County. That's 37 miles, 7 interchanges, and then within at each interchange, over here you can see the study areas, and the pink around the interchange is basically, it indicates how far out we're going to be looking at, because it's not just the corridor and a little bit of area around the corridor of 89, but we're going to be looking at arterials too, because in many, many cases, the problems are because of the delays and the issues with arterials and intersections versus the actual interstate. And this is a kind of a zoom-in view around Burlington area, exit 14 area, and this what shows really is like, how far out we're going for the, looking at the arterials, that connect to the interstate.
Elena, you mentioned 7 interchanges. I counted 6 green boxes. Is the 7th one the end of I-89, or is that the
exit
potential?
13?
The 7th one is exit 17.
Is
17 Georgia.
So it's not, it's cut off.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one for the islands.
Yeah.
Where the double diamond will take care of it.
The double diamond is like 6. Yeah. Sorry.
The diversion
It's way
diamond
up there in the
is
north.
in exit
Diversion,
16
sorry.
in Colchester, not way up, a little north,
A little north.
just a little north of Burlington. Sorry, do we
Thank
want to
you.
go back and look at that? So that's the exit 16.
The
project.
There
the
it is.
DDI, it's going to be at exit 16. We're actually proposing a DDI at exit 12 too, but that's a little bit further out. Exit 16 is in permitting and in environmental courts and appeals and all that stuff, so hopefully at some point we'll have our DDI.
Be transit.
What's a DDI?
It's a diverging diamond interchange, and it's
Okay,
oh,
what's
how am I
that?
gonna?
I'll try the
You
lay
cross
version.
traffic.
Okay.
It's trying to remove the left turns,
Oh,
so you actually cross over to the English side of the road, so you can get on the
I
ramp.
see.
Yeah.
So and then you swing back.
Yeah.
So you gotta see
like
it in
on the
action,
north
and
way.
we're not gonna.
And that happens underneath the bridges, right? So it's a very short segment that basically all the traffic is going to just change into the English side of the road and then just come back. And that really facilitates this kind of like you don't have any left turns. You're just peeling traffic off.
We had a
Which
great
is really
presentation.
very
The
efficient.
first time you drive through it?
We had a great
When I drove
presentation on
through
that here
The
at,
second time, it actually was quite interesting. It really worked to move traffic.
yeah, we had a great presentation for the Transportation Advisory Committee on that.
Yeah, so Mike LaCroix came and gave you the
Yep.
presentation.
And there's some links if you want to see
Great.
that.
On the
I'll look it up
website,
then.
in the pack underneath the transportation advisory.
There's an amazing video, yeah,
So-
you should just check it. Yes?
So if you facilitate easier travel by single passenger vehicles, aren't you then encouraging continued
Yeah.
use of that? And you're investing all these millions and millions of dollars in infrastructure. Did you evaluate alternatives such as maybe free mass transit? And would that work out to be cheaper than the construction and the maintenance? Salt eating everything alive and
I think that's the big question in this, is, can we avoid having to do this? And I'll let you go a little bit further.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that because we are going to be looking at a lot of, not just traffic.
Okay.
There's a lot of other things. We're going to be using, land use is a major component of what we're going to be looking at, induced growth and all that stuff. So we are going to be looking at a lot of that. So, as part of our existing conditions, we looked at, of course, highway and intersection capacity, our delays, where are they? We looked at the volumes on the interstate as well as level of service at interchanges. And please stop me if you don't know of anything that and ask any questions that you want, or I use acronyms that you don't recognize. We looked at high crash locations along the corridor, and we also looked at system deficiencies, geometric deficiencies as well as structural deficiencies. Where are the bridges that they're deficient? Where are the culverts that they're deficient? And we looked at bike and ped connectivity at interchanges, because that's an important part of what we're going to be looking at. So this is a slide that shows the projected volumes on our interstate, and that is between certain exits. So here we start from 17, 18, 10, 11, based on kind of like the volumes that we have now. So as you can see, between exit 14 and 15, this one right here, right now we have more than 55,000 vehicles per day. So that is projected, if nothing changes and behavior stays the same, And, if we look back in the historical volumes and we project to the future, it means that by 2050, we're going to have more than 70,000 vehicles per day on that segment alone. And that's very significant because that pushes us up to that overcapacity that Charlie was showing in his, in his slide. That segment becomes, it was purple, I think, in that slide that Charlie showed. But it means that you have more vehicles in that section of the road that you can actually fit, especially during peak hours. So that's an issue for us. We need to just, look at it, develop some solutions. Again, this is projections. If this doesn't happen and we don't see this increase in traffic, then those improvements are not going to be necessary. So that's one thing that we did. We looked at safety, as you can see. So these are all the segments, the orange segments that you see are high crash locations along the interstate. And we actually, and the purple circles are fatalities, fatal crashes. We have a lot of crashes. Yes?
Yeah, can you go back one?
Yes, of course.
I just was looking on between Colchester and Chimney, exit 16 and 17.
Yes.
It seems to have been level over the last 10 or 15 years, but you're forecasting a real jump.
Yeah, and this is based on land use, right? So it's not just the traffic. All these volumes came over from our original model, and our original model uses demographics and land use to actually estimate vehicle trips, right?
Okay.
So that is what's coming out. So it means that that area is actually going to get developed more.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Eleni, it's going to get developed more based on the town's plan for what they'd like to encourage, or the actual patterns that are happening?
Good question.
So our model has, I don't want to get into the weeds of the model, but our model has, it's broken down to what we call a traffic analysis zones, right? Each zone has household and employment in it. We are actually work with each of our towns and our pack and tack to actually make sure that those numbers are correct now, and then using existing zoning. Now, we don't know if the zoning changes. Existing zoning as well as basically ability to build, because if you have wetlands and other environmental resource impacts, you cannot build. And that ability to build, then you project your growth into the future. Does that answer your?
It's your best crystal ball looking
It's
at all
our
the
best
factors
crystal ball,
But it is based on some real life too.
Right.
I mean, what's exit 16 to 17 is Milton has had quite a bit of growth in the last decade or so. It's slowing down right now, but.
And the county as a whole was projected for growth.
Yes.
Is what your economic folks were telling you. 35%.
Employment growth.
Employment growth.
14% population growth and 20% household growth. So I mean, one of the things that's happening is we're having smaller household size and more households. Right? It's kind of an interesting dynamic, but that's another topic for another day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So.
Divorce.
Yep. How long does it take for an improvement to be made on the interstate?
Long time. Many years.
What are we talking? I mean, we're
2020
2020 now, and you're talking 2050, and then you talk about projections to 2050. So, where's the period that it's no, that you're not doing anything about it, just looking still?
Oh, probably the next 20 years. Realistically.
So we're going to be looking at 2 future years. 2050 is our way out here, and we're going to be looking at 2035 too. So I guess what we're going to be looking at is like where exactly the threshold that triggers that investment, right? If the behavior changes, if we have more people using transit and other modes, and we have TDM measures that they're successful in, and then we don't see the increase in volumes that we project in our little crystal ball based on current situation, then those improvements don't need to be happening. But we're going to be looking at, based on our best evaluation of the situation, when is that going to happen? We're going to be looking at that. Does that answer your question?
The other side of the question, I think, is
How long does it take to move a project from an idea?
That's what, the other side of the question, I think, was our conversation with V-Trans was like, if anything's going to happen here in the next, literally, I think they used the term 20 years, we need to start the planning now, or it'll take 20 years to deliver, or it will take 20 years, I mean, even starting the planning now, I think they're figuring this is a project to be delivered in 20 years.
So expensive.
And that might be optimistic, right? And Champlain Parkway's been on the plan for 30. So, is that helpful?
Yeah, I'm just saying, so expenses are starting now.
It's complicated too, right? So it is expensive, it's complicated, especially if it's an interchange. Third lane on the interstate, it's probably a little easier to design.
Well, I think there's also V-Trans kind of said, if we need it in 20 years, we need to start now.
Yes, that's what we were told that.
Sad thing. Very good.
There are other projects on the books, it takes that long to make it through planning, permitting, getting in the capital budget.
Yes, especially the capital budget. These are expensive, very expensive, you know, like improvements. So we need to just plan for that when they come, because we have a lot of needs. I'm pretty sure V-Trans, when they come, they tell you about the needs that we have. So other issues that we evaluated, as you can see, crash rates, we looked at bridges and culverts, we look at geometric deficiencies, we looked at environmental resources, and we're going to look at them again as we move forward. And what we did this for every single interchange. We're not going to go through it. We're just showing you just one. This is exit 14, and then we went and we identify where and what kind of issues that interchange has. We looked at congestion, safety, geometric deficiencies, structural deficiencies, and bike and ped connectivity for both the interstate as well as, this is Route 2, as well as the arterial. So this is where we just pause, and we're just kind of, you know, just looking to discuss some of your experience with I-89 and what are the issues that you experience with 89. And so this is the time to just tell us your feedback. Yes?
Just to go back to the population issue, I've been doing a lot of reading on the phenomena of climate refugees, and if you're going out to 2050, I wonder if you have, is that part of the calculus? Because there are many areas that are now pretty heavily populated that might not, like people might actually, I know it seems strange that you'd have hundreds of thousands of people flocking here, but actually that's not, but I wonder if that's part of the calculus.
We've not really factored that in yet. I mean, I guess, the one thing I'll say about the projections is I know they're wrong, right? So they're just kind of placeholder out there that I think when we get to the backside of this and talk about monitoring what's actually happening in the real world, and maybe this gets into some of the questions about timing to see, and we've been talking about the idea of triggers, like if if the mode shift happens and people are using more transit and we don't need to do this, then a trigger won't trip the need to do this, right? On the other hand, if we get a ton of climate refugees, which is a sad thing and they're driving a lot, like maybe that triggers it sooner than we think. I think the important thing we talk about at our table is please don't pay any attention to the years, 2035 or 2050. They're really just, dots on the map or dots on a timeline. We don't know exactly when they'll be. We're just kind of evaluating a set of circumstances with the given situation. And so is that helpful context? But yeah, it's something we talk about, but we don't have any estimates of what that really might be yet, right?
So can I ask, back to the transit point that John made, how do you project that, or are you going to actually actively encourage that and see if you can mitigate some of the need for traffic calming, I guess, or traffic efficiencies?
Yeah, kind of mentioned that our plan has this as a last option. And so we are actively, investing in planning for bike ped transit, bike share, right? That was, our staff really started the work for bike sharing in our region. And so we are working on all those things. I think this is a little bit of worst case scenario type planning, you're right? Like if that doesn't all work, and it kind of got back to the V-Trans, who was partnered in requesting this, if we have a big investment to make, we need to figure out what it might be, but let's not presume it yet. So yeah, we're kind of trying to straddle that fence.
Yeah.
Trying to prepare for the worst and hoping and working for the best.
Okay. And do you see impacts on our region from what you're doing? I mean, I'm just wondering.
I think there are definitely impacts on, commuters in both directions.
Just, commuter-wise.
Yeah.
Okay.
And frankly, we also have, interstate and goods movement and, so potentially, not hugely though. We're not talking about, major changes in either direction. And I say that like constricting the interstate or huge environmental impacts. So I'm not sure. You guys can answer that question maybe better than I, what you might be concerned about. And this would be a great time to tell us, what your fears might be, so we can make sure we're sensitive to those things.
What about housing affordability? Is that something that gets factored into the model? Not to the model per se, but we do have initiatives. We understand that housing affordability is huge, right? So a lot of the people that they work in Chittenden County, they don't live there. They live outside, and that's why we see all these commuter sheds that they just come from outside our county. So the model per se does not factor that, but we have initiatives that we are promoting, housing, and Charlie can talk about those initiatives quite a bit because we're working with a bunch of partners to just try to shift that. But it is difficult.
Yeah, and I think that is actually one of the areas of more potential implication. If we were really super successful in getting more housing, I'll say housing that's affordable, maybe a lot of it's permanently affordable too, but if Chittenden County got a lot more household housing growth in Chittenden County, it might dampen housing demand, in Washington County and Franklin County and Grand Isle, and make it, I don't need to drive so far to find a house I can afford. That's in one way optimistic, but maybe it's a bad scenario for you.
I was going to say, on the other end, it would increase your population.
Right.
Yes.
One more thing, if I may. I'm an alternate tonight, so I don't want to scare anybody here.
No scary one.
Rather than concentrating on Chittenden County, why isn't V-Trans looking at dispersing some of the activity out of Chittenden County to other areas that want growth? Berrytown, we have an industrial park we'd love to fill. So rather than the congestion in Chittenden County and cutting down the traffic, where I've had to travel 20 years to Burlington to go to work, why don't we put where the work in those towns that want to develop? So why aren't you putting some initiative there rather than concentrating right on Chittenden County? Help those people move out of Chittenden County.
Build a wall.
And then bike routes, keep them in the house, because I'm not going to bike all the way to Burlington.
We're okay accepting
I
your
think,
resources.
and I think you're kind of at the intersection of public and private sector interactions, right? So the public sector can influence the market, right? That's what we do with zoning regulations, and it's what we do with transportation investments. We influence the market in some ways. When I think about that, and that sounds good, but it also presumes that the government gets to tell the private sector what to do.
No, you can advertise what to do. I mean, we have Rock Solid out there right now between Berry City, Berrytown. That's actively promoting both the town and the city.
Right.
Why doesn't V-Trans then, rather than developing congestion or knowing that you're going to have congestion, help with that process? Wouldn't it be cheaper?
I think they probably do in other ways. And again, I don't think V-Trans, well, I don't know how to say this exactly. I'm not sure V-Trans wants to do this. I think they're, I think, view themselves as more, they're not the economic development agency, but they want to support economic development. But they also need to react to the development that happens, however it plays out, right?
They stay in their lane.
What's that?
They stay in their lane. So.
There we go. Yeah, I know. I mean, I think they're trying to play better with the other agencies, both environmental and commerce.
They play their lane real well.
Sorry, this is getting more philosophical.
Steve?
Yes.
So I've got a question related to your energy plan and the this plan. You mentioned early on in the presentation that you were coordinated, and the 2035 and 2050 dates are probably not coincidental. That those are also dates projected in the energy plan. So my question is, how does this plan address issues of trying to achieve the 90% renewables by 2050? What do you envision in terms of transportation infrastructure, things like electric buses or other technologies that could help achieve those energy goals?
Yeah, so our regional plan, which includes the transportation and energy, that's where kind of the doubling of transit services, the walking, biking, the increased land use density, which supports the walking, biking, and transit use, to get to 90% of our households, in that area's plan for growth. That's where all those are rooted. It's not just good land use policy or good transportation policy, it's also good energy policy. So they all, I mentioned doing a lot of scenarios. We were really trying to figure out what had the best energy impact. And then the other part is, of course, the electrification. Then we get to 90% of our passenger fleet has to be electrified by 2050 to be at 90% renewable. But, we spent some time really trying to think about, well, what does that really mean? Because it's not just electric cars that are coming, right? They're getting more autonomous. And the research, and this is now going back 18 months or so, was there's diverging research. We could, and this gets maybe, I think about this in the same context I think about climate refugees, is that, we could have an autonomous vehicle future where the car companies successfully market to each of us to buy our own, right? And we each have a car that drives us to work, we're relaxing in the Barco Lounger, doing whatever in our car, right? It's taking us, and the car's 6 inches from the next car, and it's almost like you're on a train, but they're all cars traveling together, right? That would greatly increase the capacity of our roadways if, like, when our light turned green, all the cars moved at once instead of the human delay we have, right? However, if all those cars are dropping you off and then going back home or something, like, some of the scenarios had like massive amount more of vehicle miles to travel. And the other direction, if we're sharing those autonomous vehicles and you're just hitching a ride with the nearest car that's coming by, maybe that dramatically reduces the amount of cars on the road. And we have a much more positive future, and we don't need to do this. So it was kind of, we left as like, those are really going to be interesting dynamics over the next 20 years to see how that plays out. And we need to keep monitoring and not presume one future or the other. So we're kind of, again, I think kind of trying to straddle a fence of let's monitor what's happening and make sure we're making the right investment at the right time and not make the wrong investment too early.
So I know that V-Trans had looked at tolls, and I think that it is not, they determined and they concluded that they're not going to be working for us. There is, so I can try and find some information from V-Trans. We are not looking at tolls for this one.
Yeah, I just noticed a lot of the tractor trailers, the 18-wheelers there have Canadian license plates on them, on this section of road, a lot of them. And they're not paying anything because they're not even buying fuel or anything, they're just driving through. And I was wondering if you'd just consider maybe having some sort of tolls on here.
Yeah, that's definitely a bigger policy
It's
conversation.
a much bigger policy, and it's a state level policy, and they did look at it, I am sure, but it's been years now that I've seen that report, so.
Yeah, since I got here, I was just kind of hearing it wasn't in the cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're looking at all these projects to expand it and stuff, maybe putting tolls on would cut down,
Right.
Yeah.
help pay for it and cut down the amount of people on it too.
Yeah. I think the difficulty in, you know, is if there are, if the diversions that tolls cause, you know, if that causes people trying to get around it on local roads. But anyway, that's from my history, sorry.
That's the reason that there used to be tolls on 95 in Connecticut, and the safety issues were so great.
Well, they're doing away with the toll booths, but they're all going to the electronics now. Yeah.
I think there's something more there where if you can get charged by the mile you're driving.
Yes,
the weight of the
I'm not
vehicle.
talking about putting up toll booths, but using the electronic pass and stuff on it.
You probably need two interstates, two directions, and in the middle, they have
Sorry, Madam
two
Chair.
lanes,
I know.
easy pass,
I
and
should be
express
deferring to you to call them.
and you can get on there, you can go a lot faster than the ones over there.
Excuse me, can we have one conversation at a time, please?
Thank you.
Has there been any consideration of, for example, light rail down the median between, let's say, Randolph and exit 17?
Yeah.
Yeah, the legislature did ask, well, they asked V-Trans to look at passenger rail, no, commuter rail. I can't remember. You know, which was huge dollar figures.
This is cheap.
Yeah, no. I'm not saying it is. And, you know, we actually applied for a build grant this past summer to try to take a look at utilizing, and I know you guys had conversations here about using all-earth rail, Blittersdorf's cars that he got. It didn't get funded, unfortunately, so it's an idea. I mean, one of the struggle I think that we have to face as Vermont is just low population, well, maybe I should put period, and low population density. As far as I know, the smallest light rail system has an urban population of 600,000. So if everybody wants to move to Chittenden County, maybe we can talk about that. That's a joke.
Thank you. They have it in the small towns in Italy, like, I mean, you know.
Yeah, and
you can get from Rome to the tip, and it's, you know, it's
socialism, that horrible word.
No, and maybe there's ways to make it work. But I don't know that, you know, if we just don't have the financial models in the U.S. to make it work. But we're so far away from a large metro. So, sorry, that's at least where I understand the...
I know, but I kind of think that concentrating the population in Chittenden County is a mistake because people are...
well, it's not our reality. That's truly a joke.
Okay, if it's not the reality, then I'll just stop.
Yeah, it's not the reality.
Right, I mean... So, yeah, and I don't think anybody's really trying to do that, right? I mean, the Vermont is a rural, you know, the vast majority live in rural Vermont. The urban population is only, what, 20% of the population? So 80% of Vermonters are in rural Vermont. So that is Vermont. I don't think that's going to change. And even, you know, the numbers that we're talking about change in Chittenden County is a percent of Chittenden County, not of the state.
Right.
But... Sorry.
Yeah.
It's our
We
land
did
pattern.
look at rail, I mean, we really did.
Yeah, and it may come up
Specifically that idea.
as something that we need to look at more again here, you know, particularly the Franklin County move, you know, which is the largest commuter move. You know, and the Link Express buses are working well now,
Yes.
right? It's kind of a surrogate for what a light rail might look like.
So I'm going to suggest that we...
Just finishing up.
Okay, yeah.
It's too interesting.
Move towards the vision statement, I think. So I mentioned before that we are now developing our vision, right? Which is, this is what the vision is, and this is what the goal is, and our objectives. And I know for the sake of time, maybe we can move. This is our draft vision statement. We're talking about an interstate system in the county that is safe, resilient, reliable, provides efficient movement of people and goods, but it's also, and that's very important, it's in alignment with state, regional, and municipal plans, and that is very important. And that's where the land use comes into play and how we're going to basically evaluate all the strategies that we're developing. These are draft goals. We talk about safety, mobility and efficiency, environmental stewardship and resilience, economic access and vitality, livable, sustainable, and healthy communities, and system preservation. Those are major categories that we're going to be developing objectives, and under each objective we're going to be developing metrics so we can evaluate bundle of strategies that we develop based on all these categories. And all of this information is on our website. We have a Envision 89 website. Sorry, I skipped that one, but that's on the, so Envision 89 website. Please sign up for it. You're going to be receiving updates. You can just send you emails. We can send you updates. And then you can see the next steps. We are now in the first public outreach round. We have finished one of our 3 public meetings in South Burlington, and we are having one coming up this Thursday evening. And then we are meeting with the South Burlington City Council next week. And then our next public outreach is basically almost a year from now, because we have a lot of work to do between now and then. And
we may end up doing,
we may end up doing
I don't know
one
how
more.
much you folks will care about this, but we're going to take a segment of work and really focus in on a new interchange potential in South Burlington, which is really not to expand the capacity so much as to provide an alternate route within that high density area. And so, let us know if you're interested in engaging. We're probably going to do a little bit more public engagement at that stage.
Right.
Maybe summer.
Maybe summer, late summer. And we're also happy to come back and provide you with an update of how our study is going and get your feedback and input.
Yeah, please come back. This is great.
Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You guys are very polite. We don't get applause in Chittenden County. Just because we're late.
Thanks, Joe.
I'm just sorry, I can give you a break. I would not give you guys credit.
Right. Okay, let's see how fast we can do this. We're at commission appointments at page 13 of your packet. Let's see if we can explain this so it comes out right. This is to appoint, a nominating committee. The executive committee nominates a nominating committee, which nominates people for committees. Janet Shatney has agreed to chair the nominating committee, and we have Michael Gray has also agreed to be on the committee, so they have been nominated by the executive committee. Rich Turner has also agreed to serve.
Yes, and he was unable to make tonight's meeting.
Right, so I think at this point,
the board elects, you can open the floor to additional nominations.
Yes.
But the board elects the nominating committee.
So, if that is what the board would like, we can...
I'll make a motion to approve.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Bob, you got it. Janet, who was the other person?
Michael Gray.
Michael and
Rich Turner.
Rich Turner, who's not here.
Yes.
And that's really who I like to appoint, somebody who's not here.
Okay, that is a good thing. Thank you. So you're
Nominating those, then the 3.
okay. I think at this. Okay, so we'll do the nomination first, and then we actually do the election.
Right.
Right. This is for the election.
You move to nominate.
I moved to.
Right.
Nominate those.
I moved to elect.
Oh, you moved to elect.
I thought the executive committee nominated them.
Right.
I moved to elect.
Yes, we're trying to figure this out ourselves.
And I will second.
Okay, let's go with that.
If you nominate and the board elects, it sounds like it's an up-down vote. I'm
Yes.
sorry, Julie's not here. If anyone else on the bylaw committee can clarify, I can't, having sat through. But you're right, if you guys nominate, the board elects.
So it's just an up or down vote.
It's just an up or down.
Right, so I think you're correct in making the motion for the election, and Peter has seconded it. If there's no other discussion or questions, then we can move for the vote, and all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, all those abstaining, the motion carries, and they are elected. Thank you. Next up is the Central Vermont Regional Plan Amendment, which Claire Rock is going to explain to us, right?
I put together a very brief presentation that kind of goes over
proposed amendments?
Yep, okay. It's explained at page 19 in the packet.
Might as well just leave it there, Julie, we know you. You cannot hide.
So the,
Can't even run.
That's right.
the Regional Plan Committee is proposing 2 amendments to the regional plan, and these are to the housing chapter, removal of the housing distribution plan, and an amendment to the future land use map. And
Do you
I'll
want me
give
to- Do you want me to scroll through for you?
Sure. So these are the two kind of pieces of the amendment that is being recommended to you this evening. Starting off with giving a brief description of the housing distribution plan that's contained within the housing element of the regional plan, that's chapter 6. I'll give a little bit of a description of what this is and then kind of say what the recommendation is. The housing distribution plan, for folks who aren't as familiar with it, it is a component of our housing chapter. And the housing distribution plan set basically housing targets for municipalities within our region. It was based on a 2003 forecast. It projected the future housing demand out to 2020, and it requires local plans to contain a detailed map indicating areas for future housing units, and also requiring towns to demonstrate their local intent to meet that future housing demand. So the recommendation of the committee is to remove the housing distribution plan component of the housing chapter. And basically what this does, or the kind of rationale behind it, was that the projected forecast that was on which it was based is outdated and it's no longer relevant, and that the requirement is no longer applicable to housing, local planning efforts, as it was projecting towns to identify areas of future housing through 2020, and now here we are in 2020. And what this would mean would be that municipalities who are seeking approval by the Regional Planning Commission, I would say seeking approval of their plans by the Regional Planning Commission, they're no longer going to be required to meet that regionally imposed requirement. And so I guess I'll just take a moment right there to see if there were any questions on that piece of the amendment.
I'll just speak in support of the amendment. I think for those of us who have gone through this process in our municipal plan, it was very clear to the planning commissions, local planning commissions, that the targets were unrealistic. They were based on a trend that really no longer existed, especially after the recession in 2007, 2008, and so on. So I would just support this change.
So now I'll move into the other change that's being proposed. And this amendment is being proposed to the future land use map that's contained within the regional plan. And so this future land use map is very similar to those future land use maps that are contained within the municipal plans. It identifies the general planning areas in the region that it is used to guide land use and development across the region. So the recommendation is to amend this, and what we're looking at is to amend the regional center planning area that's around Montpelier that doesn't currently align with the local state designated growth area. And so when we're looking at this map, we're kind of looking at this orange area designation that's around Montpelier, and I have some subsequent slides where we'll zoom in on that and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And the kind of the reason for doing this is we want to make sure that that alignment is there. That will ensure that there's compatibility of future plan development between the regional plan, the City of Montpelier's plans, and the state growth center program. So that's kind of a summary of kind of what this is that we're looking at.
What is here on this side is our current land use map. This map currently exists in the plan. This is zoomed in to Montpelier. The orange area is showing what is designated as a regional center. This is the current. And then this is what's being proposed. You see that orange area around Montpelier is expanded slightly. And so what we're proposing is to basically replace that map with this map. And so what we're looking at here, part of the impetus behind this was that last year the city of Montpelier went to review their growth center designation with the state. And at that time, staff took a look at it. And we looked at what is the area that they have as their growth center, that's depicted in blue. What is the area that regionally we have designated as a regional center? That's overlaid in the orange boundary. So you can see that there is an alignment between those two planning areas, which are generally intended to be both promoting very similar development goals. So we look at our regional plan, we look at the criteria which is established in our regional plan about how we designate future land use areas. We look at the zoning map from Montpelier, we look at the Montpelier master plan, we look at their approved growth center boundary and review that against the criteria that's in our regional plan. And that's all the components that we look at in making a designation change. So then the next step was to evaluate what does the current boundary look like compared to the growth center boundary. So what this map is depicting is we have the orange line, that's our current regional center boundary. We have the blue area in the background, that's the city of Montpelier's growth center boundary. And what's being proposed to you this evening is the change is changing the orange boundary to being the red boundary. And all of this is described in the packet, and we have some additional information.
So maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but that Crestview, isn't that the Alan Goldman farm?
That is a portion of the property that, yes, is owned by Alan Goldman.
Is this like our approval of this? I mean, the reason I'm asking is, I know there's bear up there, I mean, it's all tons of wildlife habitat and ag soils. Do we not evaluate that? We just let that go? How does this work with growth centers? We just...
So if we were to go back to the previous slide.
This one?
Yeah. This is the criteria kind of that we have identified in our regional plan. And we're looking at how does those growth areas align with kind of the municipality's vision and goals for growth and development. And how does that align with what are the policies within our regional plan. And that is currently a undeveloped area, but it has been designated as an area which is both identified for accommodating new growth into the future. So
right, so they designate it, but there aren't any, there's no evaluation beyond that in terms of natural resource impacts. We just designate it, and then if a development goes forward, it might be in a designated area, but the other impacts, we not...
So we do have, this doesn't negate any of the policies that are in our natural resource section. And in that section, we identify the policies to be protecting the natural resources that may be present in the area. But for the purpose of the future land use map, it's looking at generalized areas that will accommodate that future growth. And there may well be some natural resource constraints underlied in that area. but that this is the balance, the decision-making behind, we're going to plan for some new development to happen in this area and then protect the areas outside of it. So yes, there is some steep slopes in that area. The bear habitat was, I don't believe it appeared on any of our maps, the bear habitat in that portion of the land. But there was a recognition, and we had this discussion at the committee level, that you know, there are some steep slopes in the area, but the recognition that through the permitting process and through the review of our project review committee, any development that would be proposed in that area would still have to be in alignment with our other policies, and that they wouldn't be able to propose development on the steep slopes of the area within the regional center boundary.
You move forward again.
Montpelier's Growth Center was approved when?
Their growth center was, they just came up for their 10-year renewal last year.
So, in a nutshell, what you're suggesting is we adjust our boundary to match what they got approved?
So if we go to the next slide, there are some areas where it would be in alignment. This portion here and a portion here. We're not mirroring it exactly. In our regional plan, we have identified that this area up here would be within the regional center, but it's not necessarily within the city of Montpelier's growth center.
Okay. And what would happen if we did not align? Would that put Montpelier at a disadvantage?
So when we come through the, when a project is being proposed in the Act 250 process, we look at where that project is being proposed and how it aligns with both our planning areas and also with all the other policies in our plan. We understand that there are development proposals that I believe the city manager shared with you during the presentation. And so there will likely be an Act 250 application that may come up that is not within our regional center. And that may present some implications under a conformance review.
Claire, can you just speak to why we didn't make all of the boundary conform to the city's new growth boundary? Why some of those areas were left the way they were in the previous regional growth boundary?
So are you, is this kind of the area?
Yeah, those areas and then to the south of that as well.
Savings.
Like why this wasn't included?
No. Okay, so there's additional area outside of the city's growth boundary, right? Which it's like a leftover from our previous regional boundary. Here, let me just come up.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, let me just come up a minute. I think it's otherwise. So it appears to me that this area here and this little area are not in the city's growth boundary, right?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is why wouldn't we adjust, if we're adding these areas that are in the cities, why wouldn't we adjust this boundary to conform to the city's growth boundary?
So why, right, and I think through the discussions there was a recognition that we didn't want to shrink any areas. So we didn't want to take away something that had previously been
And the rationale for that would be?
That was that this area previously had been designated as that it's served by water and wastewater. And I believe the conversation was not to shrink it anywhere, but just to kind of add the portions that could accommodate some and have been planned for future growth.
Claire, can you just explain why the amendment is needed? Like what those growth centers actually mean, how they all relate to each other? Does that make sense?
Sure. So the regional center, that's the Regional Planning Commission's identified regional center as depicted in the land use plan. That's where we're identifying areas for higher density and mixed use development. The state growth center boundary, growth center area in blue, that's a designation that's provided by the state based on a local municipality going through a rigorous planning exercise to identify the area in which would accommodate up to 20 years of future growth and where they will invest their resources into future development. And so within our land use planning, within our regional center land use area description, we recognize that growth center areas exist within our regional centers.
I think I get it. So this is something that Montpelier needs, the blue, to be in conformance with. If we don't change it, they're not in conformance with our plan.
With the regional plan.
There may be, we can maybe flip to the next slide. There will likely be future development proposals for areas over here that the city of Montpelier has planned for, the state has designated, meets the criteria of growth centers, and there may be an inconsistency with that development and our regional plan.
When Montpelier sought its revised growth center designation, the state staff, as part of their review, indicated that this boundary conformed with your regional plan. So please be aware that that's on the record somewhere from state staff. It doesn't mean you determined that as project review or the board, but rather the state staff did and provided that designation. That was one of the pieces that had to occur. So that does not mean you need to put it in the plan. Claire and the Regional Plan Committee, I think, is suggesting that bringing it into alignment would be a wise course of action.
Yeah.
At this point in time.
Only makes sense to do it.
So Commerce and Community Development reviewed this and against our regional plan and made it that determination?
Determined that it was in conformance with the regional plan.
Did they have a public process associated with that determination?
The designation process when the downtown board. So we as a regional planning commission would have needed to step up and indicate otherwise, should we have disagreed with that finding.
But when you say this boundary, you're talking about the recommendation that
The-
Claire's making?
Can you go forward, I think it is? The blue area. The blue area is Montpelier's.
Right.
So the green is their downtown designation. The blue is their growth center designation. The orange is what's in our current regional plan, and the dotted is what's proposed for addition to the regional plan.
And I would say that this blue area was identified in their municipal plan, and the Regional Planning Commission approved it.
At the time the plan was approved, the Plan Review Committee staff discussed that that area was shown as a different land use planning area with the Plan Review Committee. The Plan Review Committee spoke with the board, and the indication was that the regional plan would be changed to bring it into alignment with the municipal plan. That's not necessarily the case up top, but that is the case down below.
Peter?
So if we leave our boundaries with the red dots, does that put us in compliance with their plan? Because we're including extra areas. You know, we're rather saying we're expanding it out to take the areas that they're asking us for. But we're leaving our areas in, but the two plans are no longer.
Right. And I should clarify, there was no request made by the city of Montpelier for this change. But the dotted red line is what's being proposed as the amendment before you.
So going back to part of what I think Peter's question was, here's what I'm going to extract from that. Claire, do the regional areas for growth have to perfectly align with local areas for growth? Or can there be differences in the land use planning areas while the plans still remain compatible? Does that?
Yep.
It's a long way of asking.
I know, I was like, I was going back to
Can they be different but still
Rather
be
saying,
compatible?
if we did not make any changes, Montpelier's growth center would be outside of our regional plan. So we're expanding out to include that, but by leaving areas in that they basically are saying, no, it's not a growth area, are we messing up there? Rather saying, if we were to change and do the amendment, should we just go around the blue area? Now, I guess that's my question, I'm not.
No, there wouldn't be any kind of reciprocal
No, but he's saying
impact.
they changed their growth area. Their growth area.
No, there
is
wouldn't
smaller
be
than
any
it's
reciprocal impact of our area, including this, and theirs not too.
So, so my concern, and it may very well be misplaced, and I think it follows up on this line of questioning, is by our having designated this newer growth area boundary, are we in some way or in some tribunal possibly undermining the city's new plan and new planning efforts? Would some entity in those non-blue areas that are proposed to remain in our designated regional growth plan for this area, could that be used in argument in Act 250 or some other tribunal to undermine their saying, no, we don't want growth there? By them saying, well, it's in the regional plan, and I went by that, I wouldn't want to do anything to undermine them.
Right.
Without their, I would think
Yeah.
we'd want their consent and sign off on this before we did this.
In
Or at least hear what they have to say.
Right. So the Montpelier representative also serves on the regional plan committee, but she was unable to be here this evening. So the Montpelier representative has been part of this process. The question about that area up there, if we were to kind of flip back a couple where there was a zoning zoning map.
This one?
No, come back. There was where there was multiple maps. Here, that upper Terrace Street area is within a zoning district, in the same zoning district that has the same density as a zoning district that is over here. So the development potential under their regulations does allow for the same level of density as in their growth center. So there
why
would
isn't
be,
that a growth center then? I don't understand.
That's where the city of Montpelier was choosing to direct the public investment that would help pave the way to encourage development.
Oh, I see.
But their underlying zoning also has an allowance for the same level of density. It was more about the directing of the investment.
So is it more like water and wastewater, that type of thing within that?
Correct, and their TIF district kind of is nested within their growth area, growth center boundary, and that's another kind of component of that.
And you said it's perfectly acceptable that the boundaries do not align. Some can be in, some can be out. And again, if we don't adjust our boundary, I guess I have to frame it differently. We don't have to be compatible with Montpelier. Montpelier has to be compatible and in conformance with us, correct? We hold the higher element than they do. And this is, as Bonnie said, a wise move on our part to adjust our plan at the moment.
So I just asked, you couldn't see me, but I just asked Claire if I could step in. Vermont statutes envisions an iterative process in planning. Local plans must be in conformance with regional plans. Regional plans, when we're changing something, must be in conformance with local plans. And so what happens is you get change like this instead of change like that. So you don't have to exactly reflect each other. They are planning at a local level and to a greater level of detail than you are at a regional level. You're thinking about regional growth, compatibility between municipalities, what that may look like. So Montpelier, in their plan, may take an area as broad as the big outline, not the orange one, but the city boundary, and say all of that area is for growth, but different kinds of growth. Whereas the regional plan might say, this area is for growth, this is rural planning district, which allows for some growth, but to a lesser intensity. So planning and plans, or plans I guess I'll say, are not just the map. Think of George Malik, for those of you who are on the board with George, when George was here. He was always concerned that the map would be not interpreted, the map would be used apart from as zoning, apart from the text of the plan, and they're meant to be read together. So can you flip back to the one that had the multi there? So our plan has this text in it that says, how are we going to designate this future land use planning area called growth, I don't have my glasses on, growth center, or growth, what did we define it as?
In our plan, we have identified it as a regional center.
Regional center, that's it, getting my terms. So we said this text and this boundary kind of visually represents what that text says. Part of what that text says, and I'm sorry, I can't read it from here, but I think number 1 and bullet says something about Vermont Downtown Board designation.
Yeah, it says area designation. Number 1, is it consistent with the state land use planning goals found in 24 VSA section 4302 compact centers surrounded by areas, dot first proximity to village towns, growth centers designated by the Vermont Downtown Board.
So I'm gonna stop there for a moment, now flip to the left. It didn't say is the exact boundary. Pam, can you go to there one? That text didn't say is the exact boundary of the designated area. It says is in proximity to, recognizing that there might be difference between local and regional because of the scale you're working at. So you could choose to be smaller than their growth center. You could choose to be larger or exactly the same, depending on what you felt our plan supported as a regional center.
Right, and I would say as part of this amendment, we're not proposing any changes to the narrative description of a regional center, as that narrative description of a regional center already recognizes that growth centers are part of a regional center.
Don?
Are you looking for us to approve something here, or?
So that's a summary of the amendments that are before you. What was included in your packet was a track changes version of the changes and just the sections in which we're proposing changes. So there's, in the memo that was included, there's a list of kind of, these are the, this is the type of changes. What I described to you here was kind of the bulk of it. There were minor other kind of formatting changes and some clarification kind of added in the cover pages. And so this, we're bringing this to you for your consideration, for approval, and based on your approval, then we would subsequently proceed to schedule a public hearing process to formally adopt these
I
changes.
move that we adopt these amendments, or approve these amendments as recommended by the RPC, and set a public hearing date for amendment process.
Lee?
I don't think we approve it, we just set a hearing, right?
It's asked, it does ask to approve the amendments, and then we have a hearing.
Oh,
Because
really?
Typically, you all
Discuss.
give something a nod before we take it to public hearing.
Oh,
You're
okay.
not officially adopting it. That's,
Oh, I see.
you're now essentially, if you pass this motion, you are accepting public, opening the hearing process to accept public comment on these amendments. And then at a future date, you could either choose to move forward with the amendments, to respond to public comment, or to send the regional plan committee back to work.
Lee?
I'll second the motion to move to approval.
Okay.
No discussion.
Okay, go ahead, Lee.
I just have one question on, if we take out the housing distribution plan, is there still an element in the plan that would identify how much housing is needed?
There would not be.
Should we add that in?
So as part of the discussion that was had at the committee level there was consideration of making additional changes to the housing section based on updated census data that potentially could lead, to what you're speaking of. The committee decided that they wanted to make these kind of relative minimal changes that would allow staff to start work on the actual new plan that will then kind of replace this plan.
Will it be identified in the new plan how much housing we need in the region?
I believe that's probably still a discussion for the board to have about what they would like to see in
That
that
takes
housing
a
section.
consultant. We would need to do a separate study. The last housing distribution plan, I believe, was based on a consultant study.
It was based upon a economic and demographic forecast.
That was it.
So we have the motion, and we have a second. And if there's no more discussion, we can move forward on the vote for
Yeah,
this.
so I want
Go ahead.
clarification, this is a motion to move this language to public comment. It's not an approval of this language from this body. We're seeking public comment on it, and that's gonna inform us as to whether or not to approve this language for being changed to the plan. I just wanted to know what I'm voting on.
Nancy, would you please repeat the motion back to us?
The motion is movement to approve amendments to the 2016 plan as recommended by the Regional Plan Committee and set public hearing date for amendment process.
That was the
Makes
action
sense. It sounds
requested.
backwards.
Well, we're not adopting
Right.
these, we're approving them, we're basically approving them to go to public hearing.
Well, that's the clarification I'm looking for, because that's not what it says.
Well, yeah, it says approve the amendments to the plan as recommended and set the hearing, I think that's the
No,
intent.
that's different than what you said. I'm okay with the second version there, Steve.
Are
That's
you
different.
suggesting a friendly amendment?
I'm
to the
suggesting a
motion?
friendly amendment, exactly as
Okay.
Steve Losby
Well, you better
said.
say what you want to say.
That we're approving,
A public hearing about the amendment.
To approve advancing the amendments to a public hearing
I
process?
liked what he said, I can't formulate the language.
The recommendation.
To approve,
Yeah, I would like to amend the motion as a friendly, and hopefully it's seen as a friendly amendment, to say that we, the Regional Planning Commission, I don't know how to say it.
I think what you're getting at, the problem,
Nancy,
Steve,
why
what
don't you
he's
repeat
problem, what he's
what
the
you
problem
have
with is when you, the first
we'll
part
go
of the
from
sentence
there.
says we
Word
approve the
approve.
amendment. So I think you say we approve the process by which the amendment goes through a public hearing, rather than, because it could be misinterpreted as we approve the amendment.
Before
I think-
public
I think that's what he's
hearing.
objecting to. You see
Well,
what
that
I
is
mean?
what I'm
Could you
objecting
say
to.
we approve the amendment being advanced to public hearing?
Exactly.
There you go.
Can I
That's
just
it.
ask who?
We approve the recommendation.
It says, it says this is an action requested. Who requested this action? In other words, whose wording is this to begin with?
This was me.
This was you? Okay. And is that what you meant, approve the amendments, or did you mean something other than
I
that?
meant approve the amendments for advancing to public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the
Can we
intent
take
I'm
Dara
looking
as a
for.
motion?
Well, we should get whoever made the motion to approve.
Who made the
John
motion?
made the
Build it.
motion.
Made the motion?
Want to build it?
yes.
No, Aaron.
Oh, I have to, sounds friendly enough to me. I'm good with it.
So Dawn will have to accept it.
Yeah.
John seconded, so Don has to accept, okay. So Don has accepted the amendment to the motion. And do we need a second to the amendment to the motion?
Well, I think it was just friendly, so it's just,
Okay,
Yeah, friendly amendment.
we've changed the line.
okay. We're ready to vote now?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All abstaining? The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dara and
That
Bill.
was fun.
What you said.
So now you voted on the motion as amended. Now you need to vote on the original.
No, the friendly amendment. That's
I
it.
think you
They accepted the,
Yeah. No,
These are
those are-
parliamentary.
We accepted it.
That's right.
And that's the amendment that we're
It's done.
Yeah, let's-
The deal's done.
A lot of experts here.
We can be doing this until
And I guess we'll be
3
setting,
o'clock in the
yeah, that's right.
We'll be setting a public hearing
We're
date.
already losing it now, so,
Please know that we need to have 2 public hearings. They need to be 30 days warned, so you will not be seeing the public hearing in March because February is a short month. It will be April and presumably May if you hold them successively. You do not need to hold them successively.
so we'll be setting that
Yes.
in the future. Moving on to the minutes at page 75. Does anyone have any corrections or additions?
move that we approve the minutes as written.
Bob
second.
moves to approve, who seconded?
Second?
Okay, we'll take Dawn's. As a second, it's on personally heard. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All abstaining? The motion carries? Yeah, okay. Reports.
I would like to add to the reports, I apologize, but this morning at the Green Mountain Transit Board of Commissioners meeting, we voted to send some transit service changes to public hearing. Because those changes affect this region, I want you to know I will also forward these to the affected communities. But essentially, Green Mountain Transit is in a budget crunch. Expenses going up, revenues staying, for the most part, steady. So those service changes, the staff looked for ways to have minimal service changes while still reducing Green Mountain Transit's cost. And they came up with what I consider a pretty innovative solution, which was that, and I'll talk about the Washington County changes. There are other changes in other parts of Green Mountain Transit's area. But for the Route 2 commuter, generally RCT, the public transit provider out of the Northeast Kingdom, runs a bus this way, and Green Mountain Transit runs a bus that way, and so they do this. We are proposing to move the service completely away from Green Mountain Transit and have RCT run the entire service. They, by virtue of wages, have a lower billing rate, so the service can continue under one provider instead of two. So I think that's a very positive change for the rider. I can't speak to the change you might experience because RCT will make those decisions, but I suspect you'll still see the bus going in a fairly similar fashion. So that is one. The city route, which is Barre-Montpelier, what's going to public hearing is the first run of the day and the last run of the day to eliminate those runs. The first run of the day has an average of 3 riders, and the last run of the day has a 0.8 average rider. So we did not see those, while those services are critical for the people who ride them, in the scheme of ridership, that's pretty low ridership. And then for the Barre-Waterbury, there's a Barre Link service that goes from Burlington to Barre, and there's a Waterbury service that goes from Waterbury to Barre or Montpelier. I got it. Right now, 2 buses do this. We're going to combine, the proposal is to combine them back to 1 bus that does that. What those communities may want to watch is that currently, by the time the public hearing happens, we'll know the answer to this, but it may mean that the bus no longer stops either at the Waterbury Park and Ride or potentially the state office complex. It might only, from a time point perspective, be able to hit one but not both.
And it'll still stop somewhere in Waterbury.
It'll still stop somewhere in Waterbury. The question is, can we hit both and still maintain the route time? Those are the 4 major changes in Washington County. The other one is looking at additional volunteer recruitment. The lowest cost driver is a volunteer driver. You pay mileage. And so for many of our services, like services for older adults and persons with disabilities, we use volunteer drivers. When we don't have volunteer drivers, we have to pay staff and sometimes overtime because it's additional work. So trying to reduce costs there. And the last one is there are some service efficiencies we hope to gain. We've been talking with Green Mountain V-Trans about sizing our fleet to the actual ridership. So when transit first started, you bought the big buses or the cutaways, which are what you see on the road now. We all imagine transit increasing. Transit ridership has generally stayed steady. You now have things like Sprinter vans. If you haven't ridden in those are pretty comfortable. You can size the fleet. So if we can move towards purchasing those, places like Plainfield Health Center might be better serviced by that. So over the course of the next year, we'll look at those kinds of service efficiencies. So those are the changes proposed for Washington County.
Will you be sending the copy of what the changes are out, or can we find them anywhere?
Yes. We'll put them in our e-news. We can forward them. I'll forward a memo to the communities that are affected directly by them. But generally, when Green Mountain Transit holds the public hearing, you should be getting notices of those as well. so that you have the opportunity to comment. It's not a done deal. Similar to you in the regional plan, the board votes to send them to public hearing for comment. But our alternative was to eliminate routes altogether. So those seemed like reasonable compromises.
Great. That was it. Would you like to adjourn?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you. Do you have a second? Bob seconds. Thank you very much for your patience and
Go with your feet.
go with your feet. See you next month.